Aldermen, councillors, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all. I'd like to thank the Chair for his introduction. My name is Anthony Tohill. As the Chair said, I'm the Group Chief Officer for the Northern Group Building Control Committee. I'm also a Strategic Director within Derry City Council, responsible for corporate services. Okay, all the building control surveyors out there, please keep your pulses in check. Once you see sight of those technical booklets, I know you get very excited, but the subject of my presentation this morning is why do we have building regulations? And when my fellow group chiefs and I sat down, particularly Liam, who was organising the conference, to talk about themes, to talk about possible speakers, to talk about topics, I wanted to be a little bit more controversial, a little bit more direct. Because I think when you're controversial and more direct, people take more note of what you're saying. So Liam was adamant that we couldn't put anything on the conference programme that would discourage people from attending. But now that I have the floor, I think I'll change the subject of this presentation. So sorry, Liam. Really, building control, who cares? Who does care about building control? What I want to do this morning, I want to run through a little bit my own personal experience in the last few years in terms of building regulations. I want to talk a little bit about the need for building regulations, some of the problems that we face, speak briefly on how we can improve the relevance of the regulations, and because of the year that's in it, and because it's a subject that's very close to my heart, and because I have the floor, I will talk a little bit about building regulations and the UK City of Culture, which has been a big part of my life for the last 18 months or so. And because the subject of the convention is the challenge of change, I will try my best to keep to the subject and note some of the future challenges and changes that lie ahead for building regulations. Okay, time for a little bit of honesty, folks. The first 34 years of my life, I got through them the best ever you've seen, without having to worry one iota about building regulations. And not for 1 second in those 34 years did I even think about building regulations. And that's being totally honest with you. Probably did, maybe I knew they existed, maybe I didn't. 34 years, knew nothing about it. So I had a life-changing moment. Number one was a job appeared in the papers. Derry City Council were looking for a head of design and project management. At that stage in my life, it was either change the wife, change the car, or change the job. So I opted for the job change. And I applied and was successful. And for 4 years, helped Derry City Council deliver its capital works programme, an extensive programme it was, involving many, many new buildings, renovations of historic buildings, etc. And I have to say that during that time, I maintained the view that building regulations were not necessary. We had in-house architects, in-house engineers. We had our own copies of the technical booklets. We felt we could do it ourselves. We didn't need to wire money up the corridor to colleagues in building control. We could get a planning application approved for 50 quid under concessionary fee. Building regulations approvals were costing us thousands of pounds. Honestly, we thought it was unnecessary. So I suppose, in essence, we wanted to be self-regulating. Life-changing moment number two, again, another job appeared. Robert White, who many of you will know. Robert had been Group Chief for 30 years at least. Robert was finally retiring, and an opportunity arose, and again I thought that sounds like a good idea. And lucky enough, I was successful, and given the massive challenge of following in Robert's footsteps. So in terms of the need for the regulations, gospel according to the DFP, sorry Seamus, I know you're here with us today, but this is what the DFP say about the need for regulations. Building regulations set standards, requirements and standards for building that can be reasonably obtained, having regard to the health, safety, welfare and convenience of people in and around buildings, etc., etc., etc. It all reads very well, but there's one line in that I possibly have a bit of an issue with, and that's the bit that it says, can reasonably be obtained. And that's a huge, huge challenge for us in building control. It's a huge challenge for the construction industry, and it's when do we be unreasonable, and when do we go into that area of being unreasonable? And that is very much subject to personal viewpoints as well. I think we all understand the DFP definition. It doesn't necessarily roll off the tongue very easily. And what I'd like to do this morning, I want to make this simple, because I'm simple enough being myself, but I think when you simplify things, you get a better understanding, and they stay with you better in your head. So I'm going to look at the regulations in terms of three key steps. Number one, buildings should be safe. And by safe, the first thing I mean is they should be structurally stable. They should be safe in the event of a fire, and in terms of fire risk, those in the industry will know that over the last number of years, thankfully the numbers of people that are dying as a result of fires in buildings has reduced, but it's still up there at about 400 people per year are dying as a result of fires in buildings. Changes in the regulations over the last number of years have no doubt contributed to the safety of buildings. We provide heat and smoke detectors, we provide adequate means of escape, we ensure that the spread of flame or materials within buildings are resistant to the spread of flame. Buildings are no doubt safer places because of the regulations, but there's still some way to go. Even you think of your own house at home, depending on the age of your house, used to be none of your bedroom windows needed to be what we call escape windows. In other words, you can open them fully to get out if there's a fire. The regulations introduced provision that there should be one bedroom window that should be an escape window. Now, houses are built with all bedroom windows being fully escape windows, so much, much safer places to be for us all. Buildings should be also weather resistant. They should be waterproof, damp proof. Now, damp proof is not a big issue in new dwellings, but it is still a major problem in old historic dwellings and buildings. And our buildings should be safe from dangerous gases. Building regulations, as those who are in the industry know, radon. We ensure that barriers and sumps go into properties on the basis of a risk assessment to ensure that the harmful effects of radon are not felt by the occupants. The other one, sorry, carbon monoxide, and I think the whole issue of carbon monoxide detectors probably explains the benefit that we have in building control from having strong elected member involvement. And I think it was only for the involvement of elected members that the requirement to have carbon monoxide alarms is now provisioned within the building regulations. What isn't in the regulations at the minute is that buildings should be safe from dangerous electrical wiring. Now, that is a provision within the regulations across the water. We have resisted this for years in the north. Personally, I think it should be part of the regulations here, but that's just my personal view. Secondly, the second key point I'd like to make is that buildings should be accessible. Stairs, again, huge source of accidents within the home. Numbers running at about 500 deaths per year as a result of falls and stairs. I mean, that's a huge number, and it is quite hard to believe that there are 500 people that are dying each year because they fall on stairs. Regulations have improved the safety of stairs. Stairs, we would feel, are much now more gentle. The goings are longer, the rises aren't as high. Stairs are not as steep, and they're wider than they used to be. But that figure is still way, way too high. And I know there may be other contributory facts, but regulations have certainly helped make stairs safer in the home and in other buildings. Ramps, okay, folks, that's a typical ramp arrangement in a newly constructed house. From an aesthetic point of view, it's not exactly very visually appealing, but it does provide a nice level means of access into the home. And while able-bodied amongst us don't really see the need for it, don't really appreciate it now, at some time in our life, we probably will do. And I have a prize for the building control surveyor who spots what's wrong with that arrangement. Anyone see what's wrong? Believe it or not, there's a little part of that ramp which has a fall height greater than 300 mils, so that needs to be protected. So you need to put up a railing along here, and I think that's where the regulations go a wee bit mad, because what happens as soon as the building control surveyor is gone, the yarding comes down. Homeowner doesn't need it and doesn't want it, so I'll not tell you whose house or whose back door that is. Again, steps, I said they're more gentle now than they were. Guarding, okay, provision within the regulations. You don't need to be a genius to know that when you have a fall from the first floor down to the ground below, that you need to protect that. You don't need the regulations to tell you that, but what the regulations do is when architects come in with different materials that they're providing that are aesthetically to their pleasing, regulations will tell you the strength that this glass needs to be. It'll tell you the thickness it needs to be. So the regulations, while it's not obvious that it's needed for that solution, will keep you right and keep the home safer. Nowadays in buildings, our switches and controls are at the right height for everyone, and I think we'll all agree that that is a good thing and a good direction of travel, that those who have mobility impairments can operate the switches and controls within their home the same way as all able-bodied people do. And finally, toilets and showers within our homes and buildings are now usable by all. And I think we all probably know someone who has had to get their house adapted because of changes in their life. And unfortunately, because of some of the illnesses that are out there, people who require these adaptations don't even ever get to see them being built. And I think that's been a problem historically, that the standards weren't good enough. And years ago, we weren't building to the proper standards. The concept of lifetime homes, there's a lot to be said for that. Energy efficiency, increasing cost of heating our homes. Even on the radio this morning, coming in, those of you who listen to Radio Ulster in the morning, and our famed radio presenter, he's been running a few sessions of late regarding the struggles that people have just to heat their homes. Deaths due to hypothermia have doubled in the last 5 years. Over 3/4 of the people who are admitted to hospital with hypothermia are over 60. This is a real issue in society, and building regulations have helped to make our buildings more energy efficient. Ventilation as well helps the air quality within the home. Personally, I think we're getting a wee bit carried away with the whole ventilation side of things. The size of vents now that we're asking people to put into their homes just to meet the ventilation standards, I think it's going over the top. And eventually what happens is people cover up those vents. You get a draft coming into your house, you cover up the vents. Old buildings naturally vented themselves much better, but our ventilation standards are getting very complex and very demanding. And one of the increased provisions in the new regs is sound protection, and I think that's very much welcome, particularly for those who live in dense urban areas and semi-detached and flats. Okay, some of the problems. Bad press. Now, I'm sure most of you recognise that document on the slide. It comes into your homes once a year, along with your lovely rates bill. And I don't know if any of you read it, but if you do, you get as far as page 23 in that document. Page 23 very helpfully tells you what district councils spend their monies on. It says that councils only receive part of the rates money, and that's used to pay for services such as, and the number one service that's quoted in the little booklet that comes with your rates bill is building control. Okay, fair enough, that's strictly correct. Ratepayers' money does go towards the building control service, but it's 1% of a typical council budget. 1%, yet it's the first thing that's listed in the rates booklet. So, an issue that I think that needs to be addressed. I think there's bigger elements of council expenditure that other than building control, that go unnoticed and untalked about. This is becoming a real issue in the building industry, and that's the cost of construction. And while the regulations are improving a lot in terms of safety and energy efficiency, it is having an effect on actually how much it costs to construct buildings and homes in particular. So we take the case of homes. Article out of the Sunday Times in October of this year, and they have termed it the next big property crisis. And the article basically states that the drive towards improving energy efficiency and trying to make homes and dwellings zero carbon is pushing, really pushing up the cost of construction. Since 2006, the cost of constructing a typical 3-bed semi has increased by £8,500. And with the UK government trying to achieve this zero carbon homes by 2016, it's estimated that will increase the cost of a typical 3-bed semi by £40,000. £40,000 in 10 years, due purely to increases in building regulations and demands put on construction. And it's thought that will make some schemes financially, or they'll be no longer financially viable. And when you think of our experience in the north and the need for homes, particularly in the social sector, it's a very big issue. And they're trying to tackle it, I think, across the water, but it's coming our way. Regulations for me are becoming too complex in some areas. Part G, sound, parts F1 and 2, energy efficiency, and Part K, ventilation. It's almost that you need to become an M&E consultant to be able to properly understand all the issues that are out there to do with ventilation. And I do still think that the regulations remain irrelevant to a lot of people. So if they're irrelevant, how are we going to make them relevant? Okay, ladies, sorry, I should have given you a warning. If you're easily offended, please look away now. But For the gentlemen amongst us, if you're caught short and you go into that lavatory and someone's already there, then you're in trouble. And you might ask yourself, how on earth did someone design this, or how on earth did someone allow this to be built? Building regulations would ensure that that wouldn't happen, okay? And sticking on the theme of toilets, that is probably a little bit too intimate for most of us in Northern Ireland to be faced with such a problem. But with building regulations here, that I can assure you that wouldn't happen. If you come home to your new house and your driveway was like that, you might ask the question, did someone not think that that wasn't a good idea, or are there no regulations that would ensure that that wouldn't happen? And this one here, where someone has constructed a door at the upper floor, where if you come out of it, there's only going to be one result. And I think possibly someone might have just did that for badness in protest at Regulation F3, which is it? No, sorry, it's R3, Regulation R3, which is now Regulation 91. It's an issue because in a lot of our sort of small and medium enterprises, the regulations dictate that adequate means of access should be provided to the first floor and any floor of a building, and it does put a lot of pressure on small business to put in lifts. The cost of putting those in is very, very difficult. And I think if you go on the DFP website and you see what's the biggest issue of appeal, where the department are ruling on appeals and councils, it's probably to do with access to upper floors of buildings. And believe it or not, somebody did actually build a set of stairs like that. Okay. I'll not say which council area that was in. Okay, so as well as I suppose shocking people with some of those howlers, it's important in terms of improving the relevance of the regulations to talk about how we communicate within building control. And personally, I don't think our communications are, and I'm holding my hand up as being part of it, our communications are not as good as they should be. We had a number of information leaflets that explain to the general public and to the industry what we do. Those leaflets are years old, should have been updated, should be refreshed on a regular basis. We don't celebrate the successes of building control enough. I think a lot of it's down to the fact that the surveyors are all very professional people who are happy to get on with their work, keep their head down and just get on with it. Probably doers rather than people who talk about what they're doing. But I do think that there's a need to improve the communications within building control. If you look at the role that our members play, we're blessed, or have been blessed for 30, 40 years to have had strong elected member involvement in building control. But I do think at times that we should simplify how we communicate with our members. I think we should report things that mean a lot to them. If you talk about the value of construction work that goes through a typical office, I mean, members would probably be very surprised to find out that that's in the hundreds of millions of pounds of building construction work that's going through your building control office. And also the increase in rate space that the work of a building control department or section does for your council. The money that's coming in the back of the good efforts of the people within building control needs to be explained a bit better. Chief executives, and I suppose talking within the family, and I know there may be some chief executives amongst us, so I need to watch what I say, but chief executives are very busy people, and the figures that we quote in terms of how we communicate with the industry, they're not that useful to a lot of chief executives. Chief executives want to know how the service is performing, and they want to know that it's performing efficiently and effectively and it's delivering for the ratepayers. And we have 5 indicators out of DOE that have been there for yonks. BC 1 and 2, which is to do with how long it takes us to assess an application. They are relevant. BC 5 is relevant, which is the cost recovery of the service. Customer satisfaction, hugely important. It's something chief executives, they want to know how the service is performing, what our customers think of us. And repeatedly in customer satisfaction surveys, building control scores extremely high. The information doesn't get out there enough, I don't think. I mean, the success that the customer-focused service that building control delivers is not articulated well enough for me. And I think that that's something that certainly our chief executives would appreciate some more intervention or information on that. I think it was Billy Gillespie in Northeastern Group ran the intervention survey and come up with huge numbers of interventions. So that's things that are wrong either on drawings or wrong on site that our building control surveyors pick up and put right. I mean, we should probably talk a little bit more about that, and I think the survey itself should be a little bit more, we should scrutinise it a little bit. I think the figures in some cases maybe were estimates. I think our surveyors are still reluctant to actually record those interventions. If there's something not right, a plan assessment, we tend to record it. When we go to site, we should be recording that and documenting it rather than saying it verbally and then coming back to the office and ticking an OK box on our Tascomi systems. So I know there's other speakers here that will talk a bit more about when things go wrong, but if none of that works, if improved communications don't work, then there are occasions when you have to make people sit up and take note. And things happen in our jurisdictions which happen because of possibly failings in the regulatory systems. Priory Hall in Dublin, we in building control in Northern Ireland wouldn't like to think that we had a situation like that on our doorsteps up here. Rana Plaza, Bangladesh, I think it was 1,123 people were killed. Building collapsed. There were 2,500 people pulled out of that building alive, but 1,123 people died. And the investigations into that collapse have demonstrated that, amongst other things, there was a failure to follow the proper building codes. And again, heaven forbid that would be on our doorsteps. Going a step further in terms of making people sit up and take note, the earthquake in Haiti in 2010, nearly 250,000 people died. And I know it was a natural disaster but there were buildings in Haiti that did withstand the earthquake. There were buildings that were designed to code. Most of the countries in the Caribbean will use the Caribbean Uniform Building Code, but in Haiti, they haven't been using that code. Their Office of Public Works used to carry out inspections in the 60s and 70s, but they're now extremely rare. So as a result, most residential, commercial and public buildings have been built without code enforcement or quality control, even of essential building materials such as reinforced concrete and steel. So a natural disaster like that struck, and the buildings weren't able to cope. So, city culture. I'll run through this briefly. What's the city culture? I hope at this stage everybody knows. If you don't, where have you been? The concept was in 2009, the Culture Secretary opened a competition for all cities outside London to bid to receive the title of UK City of Culture. And it was to build on the success of Liverpool as European capital of culture. And it had to involve a partnership of local authorities and stakeholders. So you're wondering what's the relevance to what's the connection with building regulations? And you're right to wonder because, again, typical example of how building control operate in the background and just get on with their work and get things done. So in terms of the context, the idea was to deliver a world-class programme of events as part of that bidding process. In the city, there was no indoor venue to meet the capacity needs of the larger scale events. The capacity required 4,000 people standing or 2.5 seated. So the powers that be came to me one day and said, we're thinking of building this temporary structure. It doesn't need building control approval. And I said, well, why have you made that assumption? And they said to me, well, it's a tent. I says, well, it's not really a tent because I'd had sight of the drawings. I said, a tent has poles and it has stays and it's not a tent. You can't tell me that's a tent. He says, well, it's a marquee. I says, well, technically speaking, yeah, you could say it's a marquee, but it's one hell of a big marquee. This thing was 80 metres by 40 metres. Huge temporary building. And then they come back to me and said, well, okay, but it's only going to be there in a temporary capacity for a year. I said, it's going to be there for more than 28 days. It needs an application. They said, well, it's only going to be used on so many occasions for so many hours, and if you add all that up, it doesn't come to 28 days. So they were doing everything they could to say that this didn't require an application. But knowing the size of it, the scale of it, knowing the risks, the dangers that could happen when that's full of excited young people, I said, no, you're going to have to apply, and particularly because of those risks. So application came in, and that's when the fund started. And thankfully, I had Damien McMurray, Group Officer, David Glenn, a structural engineer within Derry City Council, who were able to assess us, and I had John McDade, who was able to advise on the safe numbers of occupancy before we could issue a licence to the organisers. So they ended up coming up with a solution, was a temporary building, very, very lightweight construction. The building is only designed for 75% of the wind load. Okay. So normally, obviously, we design to 100%. So this building is only designed to take 75% of what a permanent building would be able to take. So we said, right, you're going to have an on-site anemometer to record wind speeds, manage the risk, and you're going to have to introduce trigger levels that if wind speeds go above 52 mile an hour, everyone's on alert, and if wind speeds go above 60, you close your gig and you get everybody out. So thank God, touch wood, that has not happened this year yet, but there's still about 6 or 7 weeks of the year of culture to go. So we haven't had to evacuate anyone yet because of wind, but it was a risk. It was a risk we had to take. In terms of fire safety, somebody, if you want to talk to Damien McMurray about the fun we had with this one. The contractor wasn't terribly interested in the fire safety issues. We had a real battle with them to get them to a position where we were satisfied that the occupants would be safe. I know it's a relatively simple building, but we still wanted to make sure that the escape routes had fire protection. We wanted to make sure the alarm system and the lighting was up to standard. Adequate escape routes, and in terms of the management, because this is where a lot of these things will fall down. They fall down on human factors and on how the building is managed. So I think other than having to almost write the thing for them, that's how much, how little they seem to know about that issue about fire safety management. Was a concern, but we did get there. Energy conservation, I wasn't terribly concerned about. Okay, I was concerned about fire safety, I was concerned about structural stability. It was only going to be there for a year. If it wasn't the most energy efficient building in the world, I wasn't that particularly perturbed about it. But it wasn't within my power to relax that part of the regulations. As you all know, we have some powers to relax certain provisions. I couldn't relax regulation F3 to do with energy efficiency. So when the calculations were done, the building energy rating was, it didn't perform in terms of what the target energy rating was, so it failed. So I had no choice but to refuse the application. And luckily, because of the very good relations we have with DFP, I was able to speak with DFP Building Standards, explain the problem, and let them know that I had to refuse this, and it was going to be sent up to them, but we needed them to turn their analysis around very quickly, which we managed to get it all sorted. So that's the internal of the arena during construction, and that's it in all its glory. And it will come down in January, despite some of the public campaigns to keep it. And just a summary of what Building Control did. The application was lodged on the 3rd of September 2012. When it was assessed, there were 71 things wrong with the application, 71 issues that were highlighted that needed to be addressed. To and fro for weeks to get revised drawings, additional information. And I issued a rejection notice on the 13th of December last year based on the energy efficiency issues, which I had to do under Part F. And I got a direction from the Department of Finance and Personnel to go ahead and issue approval. I issued approval just before the Christmas party on the 20th of December last year. And that was for the drawings. So over Christmas, while I was sunning myself somewhere, Damien and David Glenn, John McDade were out on site doing the final inspections to make sure that the completion certificate could issue on the 4th of January prior to the first event on the 5th of January. Now, that place would not have been opened. It wouldn't have been as safe as it was, it wouldn't have been accessible as it was, but for the work of Building Control. And I'm sure no one has heard anything about Building Control's role in City of Culture. Another one, Turner Prize Gallery. I could go into a lot of detail about this one as well, but Turner Prize out of England for the first time in its history, a very prestigious contemporary arts prize. You should go and see it for a laugh, if nothing else. Well, you can tell I'm not an arty person. Buildings, these were called buildings 80 and 81 at Ebrington Barracks were out of use since the military left a good few years ago. These were brought back into service for this year. Building Control, again, application required to go through all the approval processes. Building Control staff integral to getting that building opened on time, and it's hoped that in the 10 weeks of the Turner Prize Gallery being in Derry that about 70,000 people will pass through that building. Just bringing it back to the subject of the conference, future challenges that we face as an industry will bring change, and with the change that we need to bring, will bring challenges and opportunities. So number one, I'll just throw these out here. I'm not going to dwell on them too long, but who should write the regulations? Currently within DFP, and DFP have done a good job over the years. We've had a very good relationship with them. I'm going to speak personally. I just feel they're a bit isolated in DFP. I'd rather see them in DOE, but that's not within my gift to sort that out. And maybe at some stage, the writing of the regulations should come into a branch of local government. In terms of NHBC and district council approvals, and this is in respect of new houses, I don't see why we've got two systems. I don't see why, from a consumer, has to go and pay. It's hidden into the cost of their house, but they're paying NHBC for a certificate. They're paying building control to get an approval. There's duplication there. The consumer, in my mind, is paying twice. Fees, thorny issue in building regulations, building control. I believe the user should pay, except in the case of maybe those with mobility impairments or people who can't afford to pay. It should be possibly means tested like the welfare stuff, but why should a hard-pressed ratepayer, or why should you or I, for that matter, pay so that some of your neighbours can build a house and have it certified by the local authority? I don't get it. I think the user should pay for the fees, and the fees should reflect that. They haven't increased. They increased there recently, but not as much as building control would have liked. First increase in 20 years. We went through the biggest boom in the housing construction ever likely to be witnessed by any of us, and the fees stayed the same for years and years, but my belief is the user should pay. Core business versus diversification. Over the last few years, building control has diversified immensely. It has helped to broaden the horizon of many within building control who can be quite insular at times. It's resulted in jobs being protected, which is a good thing. And I think it's helped to increase the relevance of the service. And Brian Moreland from DOE spoke about the dilapidations, and that's brought building control surveyors to the fore in terms of their importance and the role that they play. I sometimes wonder, just maybe have we gone too far in some places? Have we diversified too much? Is building control ready for when the tide turns, when construction activity starts coming back to where we need it to get to? Have we gone too far? I hope not. Building control's position in district councils, and I think this is somewhere where change has not been good in this regard. And in many of our councils, building control is now a fourth-tier function, and the staff within building control are undervalued. And there's no denying that. That's the view, and I can see why that is the view that's held by building control, and I think it's most unfortunate. Local government reform, I'm somewhat, I suppose, comforted by the words of Brian earlier in terms of local government reform, and it does present great challenge for all of us within local government. It presents great challenge for us within building control. The 11 councils will be much larger, they'll have more powers. Building control sections will merge. Many very senior managers within building control will depart, and with that will go a loss of years and years and years of expertise. And I think building control will still likely to remain a fourth-tier function within councils. The group system, which we all know, some of us love, some of us don't, and many who will finally get their way, the group system will go, and I think that's regrettable that the very strong elected member involvement that we've had in building control for 40 years will go, and I don't think that's a good thing for building control. I don't think it's a good thing for the industry or for the consumer. I think it's the one thing that has the building control system here, the envy of our peers, is the elected member involvement. I'm not just saying that because there's a number of elected members here. So will we have a better system in 5, 10, 20 years' time without that strong elected member involvement? Don't know, not convinced. So to bring it back to Liam's nice soft title of why we have building regulations, if you can just remember three things. Just remember that they're here, regulations are here so that buildings are safe, accessible and efficient. If you can remember that, then I've achieved something in this last 25 minutes. And to bring it to my slightly twisted version of the world, in terms of who actually cares about building regulations. I didn't set out deliberately to make the case for building regulations, but can any of you imagine a society, or modern society, without building regulations? And for me, the answer is an emphatic no. And I suppose in going through all of this over the last number of weeks and days to prepare for today, I've come to the conclusion, like a lot of you, I actually do care. Thank you very much.